you all, really a really big thank you for coming to what is the last of our Labour leadership meetings in Colchester. As a recently elected chair of our CLP, I can number one tell you this is a little bit overwhelming, so bear with me. But also it's been a very interesting and exciting time to be in this role. It doesn't quite make up for the disappointment of knowing that as a country we had to endure 5 years of Tory rule, however. In Colchester alone, we've seen the size of our CLP nearly quadruple in number. Feedback has been that people are quite simply not willing to sit back and accept that we have to put up with the most neoliberal, the most out of touch and quite frankly the most cruel Conservative government that certainly I have ever known. For someone who's old enough to remember her school milk being taken away, that really is no small accusation. However, we can't ignore the fact that defeated we were, and this has rightly led to much analysis about why this was. The leadership contest has really been the key element of that debate, and I know that in my own friendship group and around my own dinner table, we've done a little bit of talk about that. Women-only carriages, where can we begin? Comrades, debate is a good thing. We should not be scared of disagreement, nor should we be scared of change, because what is obvious to all is that change we must have. And that change will be decided by our members, not the Daily Mail, not the Sun, our members. It's without a doubt that our guest speakers today, and Jeremy Corbyn specifically, has been the person that's been significant and key in changing that conversation for the Labour Party, and I think also for the wider electorate. Jeremy's been regularly misrepresented, regularly misquoted, so this is a great opportunity for Colchester to ask him and to his supporters questions directly. So Jeremy's joined by Jane Basham today. Jane is a member of Unite, the CMD, the Fawcett and the Electoral Reform Society. In this year's general election, Jane increased Labour's share of the vote in South Suffolk by over 50%, and that should be applauded. Shelly Asquith, who's the Vice President of Welfare for the National Union of Students. Shelly's a vocal anti-austerity campaigner and a strong voice in reminding us that access to higher education for working class families is once again becoming out of reach due to increased accommodation costs and extortionate fees. I'd like us to give them all a very warm Colchester welcome. Be aware that we've got a limited amount of time. Jeremy has got to go to Chelmsford after this. I've asked people to email in questions to me in advance, and I've got a list of those. There will be time to take questions from the floor as well, but I would ask that they are questions and that they're kept concise. A lot of the stuff has really been done and rerun in the national press, so just bear that in mind, please, when you do ask the questions. We're going to start with Jeremy. How long for now? There's a question. These people have listened to you for hours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for coming along today. I'll try and be as brief as I can because there's an awful lot I'd like to say. You might say this is the last meeting of the leadership campaign in Colchester. It is not the last in the whole country. This is the 86th event we've done since this campaign began in June, and we've still got another 20 events to go before the declaration of the results. And we've had now 23 hustings events all over the country. We've got another one on Thursday evening, tomorrow evening in Gateshead, and we're doing events in Scotland and the Midlands and in London, and we've done these events all over the country, and the attendance and interest in this election is absolutely phenomenal. I entered this election process because the party unfortunately did not have a proper debate about the policies under which we had not succeeded in winning the election in May, and secondly because I thought that there should be a proper alternative voice put in this to that we fought the election on, which essentially was austerity light, and I think that was one of our very big problems in the election itself. And so, with great difficulty, we put our names forward for this campaign, and eventually we received 36 parliamentary nominations, 35 is the minimum, only just in time, a couple of minutes before the polls actually closed. And we then started this campaign with absolutely nothing whatsoever. And by putting out a statement of what our aims and policies are, and by asking for support, we gained nominations from 152 constituency Labour parties all over the UK, and we gained the support of a number of unions: Unison, Unite, Fire Brigades Union, ASLEF, RMT, TSSA, Prison Officers Association, Communication Workers Union, Socialist Health Association, and Socialist Education Association. And we've been very grateful for that support, and they have been able to give us some facilities and some funding, but we've now raised enough money by crowdfunding all across the country, which has meant that we can pay for the mail-out, which many of you will have received when we received your ballot papers or around that time. And the average donation to our campaign is £23.50, and the sources of it are all open. They're all individuals who are supporters of the party. We've received absolutely no corporate funding whatsoever. We haven't been offered any corporate funding. And our campaign is about offering an opportunity and space for debate within the party, and so we produced policy statements as proposals, and that's exactly what they are, on a whole range of subjects. Obviously, economic issues are central to it, but also there are statements on education, there are statements on health, there are statements on mental health, there are statements on the safety of women within our society. Last night we launched a very, I think, very interesting document on arts and culture and the role that they play within our society. So there's a whole lot of stuff out there, and we're encouraging people to respond, and indeed they are responding with great enthusiasm. I'll give you an example. We did a document on investment in industries and infrastructure in Yorkshire and the northeast of England, and in a few days, in fact just under a week, we got 1,200 people responded, often very helpful, very interesting suggestions of how we might take things forward, how we might develop the ideas. And we've had a good response on all the other documents that we've produced, and I invite all of you to read them. They're all there online. Any views you've got, please put them forward. Because I think the Labour Party has got to radically change its method of doing business, its method of making policy, and its method of involving all members and supporters in policy making. We now have 560,000 people involved in this particular election process. That makes us the largest membership there's ever been of the Labour Party, the largest participation there's ever been in a political election outside of a public election in Britain. I don't see it as a problem. I see it as something to be very pleased, very happy and very proud of, that so many people want to come forward. Gathered here today, it's a very interesting combination of young people getting involved in political activity for the first time, older people who've become rather cynical and disillusioned with the way that our party had gone, who are coming back because there is space for that kind of debate, and they really want to see something very different, and they want to see how we're going to oppose what the Tories are doing at the present time, but also what we're going to do if and when we win a general election in 2020, and it's a very, very exciting process. The attendance at our meetings is absolutely enormous everywhere. I'll give you an example. Last Saturday we had a very busy day. We did a public rally in Derby at 10:30 in the morning. We did another rally in Sheffield at 2 o'clock. We had to have an overflow in the street outside, and then we concluded the day with an evening rally in Manchester with 2,000 people there. So one day Many thousands of people attended to listen and to ask some questions. But there's another feature to it. You very kindly said, Chair, in introducing me, that some of the things we've said have been misrepresented. I hesitate to criticise any of our esteemed journalists or media, but occasionally they sometimes give opinions without necessarily checking the facts first. But they're all human, I'm sure. There has been a great deal of abuse thrown around in this campaign, which I deeply regret. I just simply say this: I am not responding in any way to any abuse that's thrown at our campaign. We don't give it out, we don't reply. We're interested in democracy, participation and policy development. On that basis, and whatever the results on September the 12th, and I've obviously no idea what the results are going to be. There's still people voting, or in some cases haven't even received their ballot papers yet. Hope they all do. I hope there's none of you here who haven't received ballot papers. No, don't show hands, please. Politics has changed, and it's changed because the leader of the Labour Party will be elected with a mandate that is well outside the normal mandate, in that it is a popular mandate from a very large number of members and supporters, of course. Secondly, I hope all those supporters, be they registered union supporters or people that have registered as supporters of the Labour Party in order to vote in this election, will develop their support into full membership of the party, so they can play a part in the constituency party and its operations, but can also become very active in that and have their views heard and be able to take part in those policy debates. And I have to say, the growth of membership is utterly phenomenal across the whole country. I was just speaking to the chair of my own constituency party in Islington North, and he told me that our membership has now reached 2,650, and with a further 1,400 registered supporters, we now have 5,000 people in one constituency, either members or supporters of our party. That, to me, is a cause of enormous pride and enormous pleasure. It shows that we are getting through and developing real democracy about how we do things in our society. That's got to be good. Now then, I'll finish on these points, because I know you want to take questions and the other colleagues want to say something. The fundamental issue is one of how we approached the banking crisis of 2008-9. We were right to nationalise the banks. We were right to put money into them. We were right to take a controlling interest in many of those that were not formally nationalised. That was fine. The problem was that we didn't take them into proper public ownership. We didn't control what they did. We didn't direct them, and we didn't ensure they invested in productive industry or crucial infrastructure. We made another mistake as a Labour government. Instead of investing public money in public infrastructure, we handed far too much of it over to private finance initiatives in health and local government, and we're all paying the price for that through the cuts in services and the damage that it's doing to NHS budgets all over the country. No more, please, PFIs. Bailing out the banks, paid in £385 billion in quantitative easing to keep the banks afloat, as well as the money that was used to buy bank shares. I'm not opposed to that. It was the right thing to do and had to be done. But the problem was that we put the shares into a holding company. That holding company, whilst wholly government-owned, is not under direct public control, and the Chancellor of the Exchequer can sell the shares whenever he wishes, and George Osborne is busy selling RBS shares now, our shares, at a loss. I've got news for George Osborne. I think we should look very carefully at all the public assets that have been sold off this year, £30 billion worth of them. And where those assets are sold underpriced, at a loss, it's us who are taking the loss. It's the public who are taking the loss. It's somebody else who's making a profit out of it. Gordon Brown, when he became Chancellor in 1997, quite rightly introduced a windfall tax on those that have made a great deal of money out of utilities. I think we should be prepared to do exactly the same in 2020, and say it now, so that anyone that's thinking of buying up public assets at a low price might find that somebody's going to come asking for the real value of them at a later stage. The same was done with Royal Mail. go into the election proposing a form of austerity, wrong to be promising cuts in public services, and whilst there was much in the manifesto with which I agreed, and I'm sure Jane did as well, good stuff there, the problem was you couldn't look people in the eye and say, well, actually, there won't be no cuts under a Labour government, there would be cuts coming up, and that is not a good position for us to be in. And so we're suggesting, and this is a suggestion, that we develop an economic strategy which doesn't adopt an arbitrary date for moving into budget surplus, instead invests in the economy through a national investment bank which will invest in infrastructure, housing and also productive industry, particularly high-tech, high-end engineering jobs, because we've become far too unbalanced as an economy, far too much emphasis on services rather than on manufacturing industry, which is what traditionally the prosperity of this country came from. And so there's a whole lot of thoughts there. It is debated, it is controversial, not everyone agrees with it, but we have had a lot of support from a number of leading economists and those that have studied very carefully what the austerity agenda is actually about, which is about rebalancing our economy, which is about enriching the very richest at the expense of the very poorest. And if you look at the whole agenda of what this government is about, it's a political agenda about rolling back the state, promoting individual healthcare provision, individual social provision at the expense of the community as a whole. I want to live in a society where we have healthcare free at the point of use for everybody, provided by the public, not by private companies. And I want to live in a society where we have a welfare state which makes sure that we don't have destitute people in our society. We don't have people relying on food banks to survive. Instead, we recognise that we have a human responsibility, a human duty, to look after each other and try and provide some kind of this is fine, but it's electorally impossible. I just say this. If you think you're well off, good luck. Fine. One day, we all get old. One day, we could all have an accident and need public services. One day, we might have a mental health condition ourselves or know people that are going through those kind of crises. At the end of the day, we all rely on everybody else. If you've got family who are well enough off to make sure you're okay, it's good, it's all well and good, except not everybody is in that position. Many of us have children who are going to need somewhere to live, housing and so on. You cannot do it all by the free market and the individual family approach. This is why our Labour Party, our Labour movement, had the vision of a national insurance system, had the vision of a national health service, had the vision of a welfare state, had the vision of universal education and access to education. And so, yes, it costs. It costs, so you pay tax according to your wealth, and I would keep the 50p top rate of taxation, not reduce it. But I would also look at the levels of uncollected, unpaid tax by numbers of corporates. Say on housing, education and health issues. But let's approach things on the basis of the principles that we agree upon and not allow the language of abuse and brutality to enter into it. How often do you read in the media somebody who is in a bad situation legitimately claiming benefits to which they're entitled with the label benefit scrounger put it alongside them? How often do you find people on television, radio and in newspapers making remarks which can be deeply offensive to those that are going through a mental health crisis or a mental health condition within our society? Can't we change the mood music, change the language, stop being so brutal about people who are going through misfortunes and difficulties in their lives and start approaching it in a much more civilised way? That way, we begin to end the exclusion that so many go through. And I'm shocked at the way in which our mental health services are so woefully underfunded all over Britain, and the way in which many people that have been sanctioned under DWP rules as fit for work when they're not fit for work have died in the process or tragically taken their own lives. Sorry, I want to live in a more civilised society where we support about the leader of a party and the deputy leader of a party, but it's also about how we as a party go on. I don't want anyone, whoever it is, elected leader on September the 12th, to move into a big office, grab a piece of paper and write out a whole set of policies and send them out to party members and say, that's the policy, that's what we're doing. No. People join parties, get involved in life because they've got a contribution to make, because they've got ideas, because they want to make some kind of contribution. And so, we start off with a debate about how we deal with the economic issues that I've outlined. I've set out some ideas there. People may well disagree. I think they're worthy of merit and should be debated. Likewise on our social security system, likewise on health, likewise particularly on international issues and peace and the possession of nuclear weapons by this country. There are a huge number of issues that have to be debated. But if we have a confident, strong party with a very large membership taking part in that discussion and that debate, we reach a situation where we're also very strong in the community. So when we're opposing the Tories' welfare reform bill, what an abuse of language that is, we're opposing it because we do not believe the poorest and most vulnerable in our society should be hit in the way that that bill is doing it. When we oppose their budget for a fire sale of public assets, we're doing it because we don't think they should be sold off. When we say you shouldn't be penalising children in large families, we say that because we do not think they should be penalised, and we're prepared to go out and say that to the wider public. That is when you get respect. That is when you get that participation. That is when you get that degree of confidence. And so, we've got a huge struggle ahead of us. But if we don't join in that struggle, we don't join in that campaign, don't join in putting an alternative to the narrowness and the meanness of Tory Britain, then Tory Britain will carry on. Staying at home, shouting at your television, even throwing shoes, newspapers or anything else at your television won't actually change anything. It might damage your television, but it won't change anything. And so, public participation is what brought us many of the good things we have in our society. Public participation in this process has been so amazing. I'm so encouraged and excited by it. It gives us the chance not to have to say to the next generation, sorry, you're going to be poorer than our generation, and to your children, really sorry, but you're going to be even poorer than your mum and dad. And to the generation after that, sorry, you're going to be even poorer than your granddad and your grandmum. No. Does it have to be like that? Do we have to live in a society that's so grossly unequal that the richest 5 families own more than 20% of the wealth of the entire country? Do we have to be so unequal? No, we don't. None of these things are simple, that I readily concede. None of these things are simple. We have to play a role and play a part. That's why we entered this leadership election campaign. That's why I believe it's so interesting and so exciting, and that's why we can be so strongly confident of our abilities together to bring about real improvement, real justice and real social change within our society. Thank you so much for inviting me.
That's what we need right now, so thank you very much for that. We're going to hand over to Shelly and we're going to hear from James before we go to questions. Shelly, I understand you've got a local connection which you're going to tell us about as well. Yeah. So, over to you, thank you.
Thank you. It's a little bit daunting to have to try and follow Jeremy Corbyn, and I won't speak quite as articulately, but then I'm not running for leader of the Labour Party. But I do want to talk to you, well, I'm not sure about that, but I do want to talk to you about why I'm so delighted that Jeremy is running, and it's an honour to do so in Colchester, because it was here that I got my own political awakening. 5 years ago, I was working for the council in a local call centre, and I was outsourced, low paid, on a 0 hours contract. I hadn't gone to university that year because I couldn't afford to. There was a general election coming up, and it looked as if Labour was set to be defeated. And something, I don't know whether it was deep-rooted anger or Gordon Brown's sad face, but something motivated me to join the Labour Party that year. And it was just around the corner over in Greenstead that I did my first door knocking session, I remember. But since then, in those 5 years, I've seen opportunities for students and young people like me disappear. 8 years ago, I was about to start college. I went to the sixth form college in North Hill. Is anybody from here or went there? I know I saw some familiar faces over there earlier as well. And I absolutely loved it there. I got to break away from my stuffy school and do something a little bit creative. And it was there that eventually got me into art school. But I wouldn't have gone there if it hadn't have been for the education maintenance allowance. And unlike the Tories would have you believe, that money didn't get spent on going out, getting drunk and on drugs. That £30 a week actually paid for my bus fare, £28 a week, to get me into Colchester to go to the college. And I'll tell you that £2 a week left over doesn't buy you much drink. So I wouldn't have gone to college without it, and I wouldn't have gone to university without the maintenance grant, or I wouldn't have gone to university if it had been £9,000 a year. So it feels as if everything that I relied on to get me through education has been ripped away by the Tories. EMA cut, tuition fees trebled, and grants set to be cut next year. So no wonder then that so many young people are supportive of Jeremy Corbyn, especially when his first big announcement was to strip away tuition fees altogether and to reintroduce the maintenance grant. But it's not just education funding that young people are having to face. We've got a hostile Home Office policy that's forcing international students to line up outside police stations. We've got the driving down of wages, forcing our workers, our teachers and lecturers to line up on picket lines. Cuts to the welfare state forcing young people to line up at food banks and in job centres. And now we need a Labour Party that knows which side of those lines it stands on. We've got Jeremy Corbyn standing to be sure which side of those lines he will stand on. One which isn't complicit with racist Home Office policies designed to scapegoat migrants, which won't accept low pay as the standard, and which will not capitulate to a government that is forcing people into poverty. Now, Jeremy hasn't only stood up for us in Parliament opposing the welfare bill and other important policies. He's consistently stood with us on those picket lines, with us on those demonstrations. He stood side by side with working people, and he's done so consistently. And it's that consistency which is bringing people to his campaign. Because while Labour was pandering to UKIP on immigration, Jeremy consistently and proudly stood up for migrants. While Labour couldn't make its mind up on tuition fees, £3 grand, £6 grand, or a graduate tax, Jeremy has consistently been in favour of free education. And while Labour's stance on intervention has been shaky at best in the last few years, Jeremy has been consistently anti-war. And that's what resonates. It's not just about the politics of hope, but it's the authenticity of not just saying it at the right time, saying it when it's popular or when it's Labour Party leadership election time, but always being in favour of fairness, of equality and of peace. And young people are inspired by that. We're seeing young people come to these rallies, packing out halls, packing out our phone banks. When the first University Labour Club made its endorsement in its leadership election, it made it for Jeremy Corbyn. When the second and the third University Labour Clubs made their endorsements, they made it for Jeremy Corbyn. We saw hundreds of people packing out CLP nomination meetings, particularly young people, nominating Jeremy Corbyn, and doing so in their young trade union branches as well. And I'm confident that the tens of thousands of young people that have joined the Labour Party or signed up as supporters will be casting their ballots for Jeremy Corbyn. I'm confident that our fight back can and will be supported by an anti-austerity Labour Party that is on the side of students, on the side of young people, on the side of migrants and of the working class. That Labour Party will be led by Jeremy Corbyn, and so will a future government. Thank you.
Equality, fairness and peace. Nothing too controversial there in my view. Jane, over to you. Thank you ever so much for coming all the way down from Hadley, just up the road.
Yeah, which is a million miles away from Colchester. Can you hear me?
No.
Can you hear me now? Yeah. Lovely. I guess my connection to Colchester is I lived in Halstead, I live in Hadley now. My daughter came to Colchester Sixth Form, so I do know the area quite well. And I guess in terms of how we did in May in South Suffolk, I also ran to be Police and Crime Commissioner in Suffolk in 2012. I stood, despite Labour's policies not being about hate crime, harassment and stop and search, these are things that I stood on, and I topped the poll in the first preference. If somebody said, I should say that you could argue that I'm potentially your closest successful Labour politician, but that sounds a bit arrogant. We're not here to talk about me. Tonight's the first time I've met Jeremy, so I don't know Jeremy, but I do know that for me he represents the change that we need in our country. And if we want that change, our party needs to change. Our future cannot be like our recent past. And I want change not just in our country, because I can't accept a definition of economic success that involves the goods that we buy being put together in sweatshops around the world, in which young girls forgo an education in order to put food on the table. I cannot accept that definition of economic success. I can't accept a definition that membership of the European Union is serving us well, when I know that the dumping of agricultural surpluses is wrecking rural economies, undermining self-reliance on food and producing increasing hunger across Africa. And I cannot accept that my country is civilised when people displaced by conflict abroad are demonised and rejected, and when those who do succeed in getting here, and I ran a racial justice organisation in Ipswich for 6.5 years, everything that people are unhappy about, they blame the people that have come here for sanctuary and safety. That's not a civilised society. I don't believe have lost their humanity. I think people are being discouraged from demonstrating that humanity through irresponsible language by politicians and, sorry, the media too. And maybe my aspirations for change you might think are unrealistic, but it's not just changing a party leader and carrying on as we did before that's going to produce that change. If we're going to return to government, May's election result gives us a mountain to climb. And it's not about target seats and percentage swings, and we may already have witnessed the last knockings of traditional politics in this country. The 2.5 party, the system of alternate majority governments may have breathed its last. And we know the system's broken. You know, our MPs have never been more unrepresentative of people's votes. And don't get me started on the House of Lords. Shame, absolute shame, out of touch. It was said by many pundits after May the 7th that Labour lost because it didn't address people's aspirations, and I do think there's something in that. And I think it seems to me, judging by you're here tonight and Jeremy's campaign, is reawakening, and it's all about people's aspirations. But it's odd, isn't it, that those who talked about we didn't address aspiration enough are not happy that somehow now we are seeing masses of people coming together to listen to Jeremy Corbyn's talk. I believe, thank you, I believe that politics is shaped by real-world experiences and not just journalists faithfully echoing the prejudices of billionaire foreign media moguls in how they represent the world to us. And I have a formative political experience to illustrate, and you might think it's not ever so significant, but it was to me at the time. As a teenager, I worked in Knightsbridge at Harrods. I was a grammar school girl. I came from Kent, and there's a grammar school system there, but I would never get there now. I come from a very working class family. My father is a painter and decorator. I commuted via British Rail, and it was brilliant. In the smoker's carriage, I have to say, from Gravesend, no, I don't smoke anymore, through to West London. Nearly all of my pay then went on rail, and my keep to my parents. And I remember there not being an awful lot left. My work colleagues, many of whom seem to come from much wealthier backgrounds than I, seemed to have money to burn. And I recall vividly my humiliation. I was called to the personnel department in my 3rd year. I purchased my clothes on Gravesend Market. Anybody know Gravesend? Ka-ching! The market's not how it used to be, but anyway. And I was told that my appearance, the clothes that I wore, were not okay. And I can recall that humiliation today, and I remember going home on the train and thinking how I was going to ask Mum and Dad if they could help me out to buy perhaps a smarter suit. And they did. Dad probably did 7 days a week as a painter and decorator for a few weeks to help me out. That experience underlined for me, viscerally, what inequality was all about. The reason I tell you is that it took place in 1983 when Jeremy was elected, first elected to Parliament. But what's astonishing is how little things have changed. But it's also that since then, the gap in income and wealth between the top and the rest of us has grown even greater and continues to widen. And my teenage experience is put into perspective by the mountains of debt that youngsters are expected to shoulder today. I've run a civil rights organisation, and I currently work with homeless young people and adults with mental ill health and learning difficulties. I know how inequality closes down lives. I know how it wastes potential, ignores talents, denies opportunity, prevents people thriving, and stops all of us flourishing. It concentrates power and resources in too few hands. We see how corrosive money is of our democracy. Politicians bought and paid for, unrestrained, secret lobbying, corporate power and influence allow free rein over our representative institutions. They want to get rid of judicial review. They want to get rid of freedom of information requests. You know, we will have no say. This lack of transparency and accountability. We must defend public services. Our present economic system has problems in dealing with the idea that we should all have some say in how we influence over decisions. Our democracy is expected to serve those in charge of our economy, while people who are creating the wealth will have no say in workplaces. The erosion of workers' rights is deeply concerning. Democratic decision-making, even at a national level, is only permitted on terms set by unelected global institutions. The IMF, the World Trade Organization, the World Bank, just 3. Their interests come first, and people's interests are for second. So I'm here, backing Jeremy, because I think for me it represents our choice, the choice we face. We can allow our economics to dispose of our democracy, or we can harness our democracy and take back control of our economics. I favour the latter, I'm sure you all do too, and I think Jeremy does. So it's why I'm here tonight. Thank you for listening. There's a renewed confidence in Labour, and Jeremy represents that to me. So I say, Jez we can. Thank you.
All of our speakers. Interestingly, I think everything that has been said probably answers most of the questions that have been sent in, because I think they are the things that people are worried about. It is about cuts to public services. It is about the absolute decimation of our criminal justice system, to legal aid, to probation, to police, to the NHS, to education. I mean, you know, you can just keep going on. What really concerns me is, you know, how we're going to look at the end of 5 years of this, and that's the scary part, and that's why we really need to stand together and be kind to each other whilst we're standing together in order to fight this, because I don't think it's going to be an easy ride by any stretch of the imagination. I'm going to go to some of the questions now. Thank you to everyone that sent them in. I'm going to begin with questions kind of around the economy. So if people have got questions that they want to ask around that, then pop your hand up. I'm going to begin with the ones that have been sent in. And I'm also going to ask the questions from people that are actually in the room, because I don't think it seems very fair if people have sent them in and then there's, you know, you're not here to represent the question. So is Linda Ralston here? Shout if you are. Okay. I will just say that that question was actually from a small business owner who was pro what she's been hearing from you and the economy. Because I think a lot is said about business owners being, you know, scared of your approach, and I don't think that is the case at all. I think in fact it's coming out quite the contrary. Is Cameron's, oh sorry. It's the end of the question and it actually says Cameron's BS, which I think means Cameron's bullshit, doesn't it? So, I really apologise because I haven't actually got the name of the person here. Questions, please shout afterwards. Jeremy, how are you going to take advantage of your current mixed favourable media attention to actually dominate the narrative at every point? And on every point, so your policies will be mostly irrelevant, although I don't think they are, and you can present them at leisure at the next election. But everything the Tories say and do will be jumped on and shown to be wrong and bad for the country and the individual, giving the milder, politically interested people answers that they can give to the man in the pub who's parroting Cameron's bullshit. It's not a straightforward question. And it's actually not really about the economy, it's about, I think that's a question about the media, which is really, it's a really important one, because we have got a very, I feel really sorry for the press in here, because you're getting a battering, but you kind of deserve it. So much terrible right-wing press. How do you tackle that?
A number of things on the media. It's absolutely a crucial question. When we started this campaign, it was very obvious from the first moment of the first interview that we were going to have a very hostile and very hard time from a lot of the interviews. And I've done about dozens and dozens of interviews that have been sometimes extremely hostile, and you have to try and get your point across. I usually approach an interview on the basis that there's 2 or 3 points I'm absolutely determined to try and make during the interview and try and get them in. But if we, as a Labour Party and a Labour movement, relied on the majority of newspapers and media channels to get our message across, we wouldn't get very far at all. We have to do it by other means. In the past, we did it by leafleting, by talking to people, and by public meetings. And in a former life, I was an organiser for the Labour Party in Hornsey and Wood Green, as well as being a union organiser, voluntary agent for the party, and we did a phenomenal amount of leafleting. Things have changed quite a lot, and whilst we still do a great deal of leafleting, it's social media that is actually very, very important to a very large number of people in our society. The numbers of people that buy newspapers is declining very fast. I won't ask you for a show of hands on it, but I bet less than half the people in this audience this evening regularly buy a newspaper. You probably pick up most of your information online and elsewhere. And so our campaign has been around social media to encourage people to, MPs that is, to nominate for the ballot, but secondly, to get that message across. And I just sort of almost stopped myself thinking, well, in my speech I said, if you want to see what the policies are, they're all there online, please look at them. There's a slightly dangerous assumption that everybody is online all the time. Of course they're not, but it is a way of going around that media bias. But what I would also say is, and this might sound a bit odd to some people, I think it's also very important to defend the BBC as a public service broadcasting organisation. certainly all of you in this room at times have got extremely angry with the news values and the way in which the BBC does a lot of its news reporting. I get annoyed with that. But I just think having a public service broadcaster, which is paid for by the licence fee, produces 5 or 6 television channels plus regional channels, produces 8 or 10 radio stations that everybody can reach, as well as regional ones, a very good interactive website, and a huge amount of investment in the creative industries all across Britain. If we allow the Tories to go on with their unremitting attack on the BBC, they did it by reducing the licence fee increase last time round. They did it by top slicing it to fund other things. The BBC have offered up cuts again to top slice its own income by paying for the over 75s licence fee. And the Tories are not done yet. They want either the website to exist behind a paywall, or they wanted to introduce advertising, or ultimately they want to introduce subscription channels for the BBC. If you look across the Atlantic, the American PBS, Public Broadcasting Service of the United States, was once a very good public broadcasting service. Not exactly the equivalent of the BBC, but somewhere in that direction. It's been underfunded, almost totally destroyed now, barely exists for many people in the USA, and the basis of news value reporting is actually Fox News in the USA. I'm sorry to say that unless we control the levels of ownership of media outlets in our society, protect the BBC as a public service broadcasting organisation, give some sort of support by environmental support in terms of taxation and things to ensure that local newspapers survive in various forms, then we end up being a less well-informed society, and one in which people simply, obviously, don't necessarily know and understand what is going on. And so I support the NUJ's proposals on preventing multiple ownership of broadcasting and printed media outlets, and I support defending the BBC. Media is always going to be difficult. Yes, we're going to get hostile times, and that of itself isn't wrong, because the media should be inquisitive, should be demanding of people, but it is a right to free speech and a right to know. It should not be simply a right to abuse, or a right, in the case of some of our papers, to continuously and systematically denigrate women, people in poverty, people in difficult situations in their lives. There has to be a balance drawn somewhere. But at the end of the day, it's also up to us how we talk to other people. Think back to those that must have campaigned against the most impossible odds in the 1920s and 1930s for the very idea of health service as a right, free at the point of use. It must have been incredibly difficult to do it. They must have knocked on tens of thousands of doors and had complicated conversations with people. But eventually they got there, and we all benefit from it. So never give up on campaigning, never give up on conversations. You shut yourself away, you don't achieve anything. If you go out there, you've got a fighting chance of achieving something. I think it was an economical question.
I'm going to go to the question from Renee Reitzmer. How are you doing? Thank you for the question. We're in a university, so this is a question about the vision of the Institute of the University. So we know Jeremy's in favour of scrapping the student fees, but we'd also like to know how you feel about the general commodification of universities. Do you think that scrapping the student fees will automatically combat the neoliberal, marketing-focused university structures that are currently in place? And Shelly, I'm sure you're also qualified to answer this question as well.
Okay. I think we can all answer that. I think it's a very important question. Thanks for asking it. Yes, I first of all approach the thing that I'm constantly shocked, actually, when I talk to graduates about the levels of debt they're in. I was talking to we had a big rally in Preston a month ago on a Saturday morning. This young guy came up to me, and his friends introduced me to him, and he said he just graduated, he got a good degree, well done him, and he worked ever so hard, and we congratulate him, as he should. And then I said to him, if you don't mind me saying so, he wasn't very happy about it. He said, how would you feel if you just got a bill for 52,000 quid? You know, you think, poor guy, worked really hard at school, got his A-levels, went to college, got university, and got a good degree, and he's then saddled with this enormous debt. During the time I could have gone to university, I didn't. I'm not claiming any great hardship. It was a choice on my part. It would have been free. I would have got the fees paid, I would have got a maintenance grant, I would have got free university education. I remember people coming to this place when it was built, free university education, and well done them, it was good. But who is my generation to take it away from the next generation and the generation after that? I also recognise that the university education is very expensive, right? I get that, I fully understand that. But I look at it in this way. We all benefit from the education of others. If somebody is a good architect, a building is safe. If somebody is a good engineer, the train is safe. If somebody is a good doctor, your health is good, and so on. We all benefit from each other's education. And we should sort of look at education as something that is for all of us, as well as for the individual and for the good of our society as a whole. We should also look at it on the way in which we pay for it. And so I'm suggesting that by an increase in corporation tax rather than reducing it, we could well afford the suggestions we put forward in our proposals. And when the idea was floated of a graduate tax, I remember discussing this with Tony Benn one night. Tony Benn and I were great friends, and we often talk about these kind of things. And he said, you know something, I've just got this really old-fashioned idea that people should be taxed because they're wealthy, not because they've been educated. It was summing up the whole situation in one sentence. But the other issues surrounding education are these, that adult education is something that my parents' generation valued, many others have valued it. So those that have various reasons, maybe didn't do so well at school, or just want to do something else and learn something else, give them the space to go back, give them the space for adult education. Have adult education that helps people learn English as a second language, learn all kinds of things. But cutting adult education, making it yet another commodity, means that we're all the poorer and all the weaker as a result of it. And the third area I look at with education is that of schools and school governance. Now this government is, obsessed is the only way to describe it, with the idea that free schools are the solution to all our issues and all our problems. And that every school, if it's not a free school, should at the very least be an academy. They seem to have some unbelievable, really rather odd dislike of local education authorities. I'll give you an example of how I think the family of local education can work to the good of all of us. I represent a London borough, or half of a London borough, because there's 2 constituencies, and I'm very proud to do so. And I got a call last year saying, would I like to come to the Royal Albert Hall for a school's music concert? And I said, very kindly, thank you very much. And I indeed went to it. And that went because our schools were putting on a special performance, and it was very ambitious. They've got a 100-piece orchestra and a 200-voice choir. Wow. How on earth do you start rehearsals with that one? And they came from every school across the whole borough, and they've been put together by the music advisor to the local authority, because we have an effective local education authority that put together a family of schools and a family of endeavour to achieve that wonderful evening in the Royal Albert Hall. And I was very proud of them. And you think, where does that lead to in the end? Those kids know each other from different schools. They've done music together, they've sung together. You never know where that sense of the collective will lead to. If instead of having a local education authority pulling people together, we had 40 competing schools all running a competition against each other, all answerable directly to the Secretary of State for Education, theoretically, as free schools, where they might not even be qualified teachers either. Well, is that really the direction we want to go? I would rather we re-empowered local education authorities and brought the free schools and the academies into the local education authority rather than driving them away, which is what
of higher education is an interesting one, because we were pondering on the way here about why this is called the Ivor Crewe Lecture Theatre. And I don't want to make any assumptions, but Ivor Crewe is actually a governor on my old university's governing board at University of the Arts London. And we've got lecture theatres back there that are called the Louis Vuitton Lecture Theatre, because they've had huge sums of money donated by these corporations in order to name fancy buildings after them. And in the last, I guess, 10-20 years, we've seen universities pump so much money into fancy new buildings and high rises and all the best equipment and resources, but actually forgetting that they need to spend money on the students and the staff that are in those buildings. So you've got massively underfunded mental health provision, for instance. You've got crumbling student halls of residence, and it's all about recruitment, who they can get through the door. A lot of it is international marketing as well, bringing people into the door but not supporting them when they get there. So I think it's not just about getting rid of tuition fees, there's a whole number of things we could address with higher education funding. I think we need to do away with schemes like the National Student Survey, which encourages students to think of themselves as consumers, to mark their education out of 5. It's also used by managers to really undermine staff. So there's all these sorts of tools, the league table culture of education that compares different types of pedagogies that shouldn't be compared. You can't compare a degree in economics to a degree in art history. It's just not comparable. There's a whole range of things we need to do to reform higher education. It isn't just about getting rid of tuition fees.
We had a lot of questions sent in about the cuts to services, the vilification, the really just terrible treatment of disabled people that's going on, and really is just getting worse and worse. So I can't ask all the questions, we have got a limited amount of time, but I wonder if you'd be able to say something about really how you're going to reverse that trend.
People with disabilities have suffered more cuts than anybody else, and I've been working with disabled people against the cuts on a lot of this, and it comes in a number of ways. I'll give you an example. The Independent Living Fund, which is something I was very proud of, the idea that there was an effective national fund available there which can be provided to people with often multiple disabilities to be able to live independently in their own homes. So I think it's actually a great idea and how we should do things. And indeed, I had some friends who lived through the Independent Living Fund in my constituency and community. I thought it was absolutely great. This government decided to hand the Independent Living Fund over to local governments without protecting it, without ring-fencing it. It used to be administered nationally in Nottingham by 100 civil servants. I don't know the total number of people administering the Independent Living Fund through every local authority in the country, but it's got to be much more than 100. I don't know what the total figure is. But I do know that because it has not been ring-fenced, except where 1 or 2 local authorities, apparently Birmingham is one of them, have made a decision to ring-fence it, basically it's ended, because it's been swallowed up by other local authority funding needs. And I can understand that as a former councillor myself, and I can sort of understand how these things are done. Everybody's scrabbling around for bits of money to keep their department going. The Independent Living Fund is just seen as a bit of a bunce that came to the local authority. They've spent it on other things. It's shortchanging people, often with multiple disabilities, who therefore cannot remain living in their own homes, and often end up costing far more to lead a less good, less fulfilling life because of it. It's really quite cruel the way that this Independent Living Fund has been treated. I would want it to be taken back from local government and administered nationally as a right, just like any other benefit that we have within our society. Secondly, has been the way in which the availability of work tests have been operated against people with disabilities. I have lost count of the number of people that have come to see me in my own advice bureau who've been for a test, told they're fit for work, Some have physical disabilities, some have mental health conditions, and whilst ideally, if people are able to work, they should work, if they're able to and want to, of course. But this is forcing people into a situation where they're told they're fit for work when they're clearly not. They then fail the test, so they were sanctioned and get no benefits whatsoever. They then appeal against it, and some months later, usually 60% of the cases are overturned and they win appeals. But the stress, the strain, and the tragedies that go with it, and the numbers of people on disability benefits that have taken their own lives as a result of this process of unbelievable cruelty is quite simply wrong. And I just think we have to say that those people who we've all campaigned for to end disability discrimination, allow people, or encourage people to live in their own homes in a supportive environment, and provide a caring environment for them, is something that we should be proud of and not allow it to be taken away and destroyed on the altar of cutting the welfare budget altogether, and therefore leading to even greater stress and greater poverty. Ian Duncan-Smith last week was forced to reveal the number of people that have died whilst under sanction in receipt of benefits, and it's truly frightening. And he took months and months and months of obfuscation before they were finally forced into revealing those figures. That is what ought to be seen as a total national scandal, the way this has gone on.
The civil rights organisation I ran was funded by the Equality and Human Rights Commission, and when the Tories took over in 2010, they took out its teeth totally. And I think that's a real concern that I've got in terms of not just the impact, and some of the young people that I work with are sanctioned and applying for food parcels for them. It's really traumatic, but people are just unable to access their rights, and I know voluntary community organisations providing advice and guidance are absolutely creaking at the seams, and they too have had their voice taken away by the Gagging Act. So there is so much that I think we have to stand up and speak out about, and particularly in terms of disability. Jeremy mentioned disability legislation, the Equality Act. We need to reinvigorate that, and we need to give it back its teeth because it's been taken away at the moment.
I'm going to ask a question from Barry, who I know is here. And the question is, what strategy do you have for dealing with violent and non-violent extremism, both domestically and internationally?
Extremism, particularly racist extremism, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, far-right racism in our society is something that has to be absolutely and totally condemned in all situations and all circumstances. And I'm very proud to represent a very mixed, very multicultural constituency, and I speak at mosques, synagogues, temples, churches, and all the places, and give exactly that same message, that I want our children growing up understanding the multi-faith, multicultural society in which we live. Don't be frightened of it, be proud of it, see it as a great opportunity, see it as a great learning. It is what modern Britain is really about. Obviously, extremism, which is violent extremism, is of course completely wrong. And I guess the background of the question is the growth of ISIL in Syria. Their origins are not from nowhere, their money is not from nowhere, their arms are not from nowhere. The results of the destruction of society in Iraq at the end of the war have played out in lots of ways. They've played out in huge numbers of refugee flows from Iraq, originally into Syria and now elsewhere. Now Syrian refugees moving into Lebanon, and others moving into other places. Some of those poor people end up dying in the Mediterranean, some of those end up reaching the shores of Europe, and you look at the refugee flows that are happening at the present time, some of which are a consequence of the wars. And then you look at how ISIL came about. And so I think we have to do all we can to stop any arms flowing in, stop any money flowing in, and stop any oil being bought outside to try and isolate and cut them off. I do not believe that Britain getting involved in another war in the area is actually going to make the situation any better, but will probably make it rather worse, because you start high-level bombing. I'm not sure what you're going to achieve by that. So there has to be a political process across the whole region, and in a good way, the new tentative agreement with Iran on nuclear processing is a good thing, and indeed I was in Iran last year as part of a delegation trying to encourage that process, and I raised many, many objections and concerns on the Iranian human rights record at the same time. It means that there is the possibility of bringing about some kind of political conference that covers the whole region, and will help to isolate ISIL and ISIS forces. How do we stop people joining those kind of forces? Well, I think you do it by inclusion, you do it by example, you do it by opportunity, and that is something that we all have to promote in our own way within our own society. But if we use the language of racism towards any faith or any group of people, then the consequences are very, very dangerous and very, very serious for all of us. And so what we do in our own society, how we treat minorities in our own society, respect them rather than blame them, how we deal with refugees coming into Europe, respect them and give them a human response rather than blame them. Otherwise, we get into a very bad place. And I'll just conclude with this. I was interviewed outside by some colleagues, they might even be here still, from German television. And the point I made was that Germany, as the economically most successful country in Europe at the present time, has taken over 200,000 refugees and integrates them into their society as best they can, and recognise they have a duty towards them. We all have a duty under the 1951 Geneva Convention to help asylum seekers wherever they come from, if they're fleeing from religious or social or political persecution. And I think Britain should be playing its part with other European countries on supporting the asylum seekers that have come to Europe, but above all, also looking at the causes of people fleeing in the first place, such as human rights abuses in Eritrea and many other countries, and looking at the environmental and war destruction that's taken place in other places. Is it going to be credible that when we read the history of this part of the 21st century, we will read that the main response of Australia was to try to farm its refugee problem out to poor islands all across the Pacific, or that Britain and many other European countries' response was to try and physically keep people out rather than looking at the causes of the refugee flow in the first place? They are all human beings. They're all human beings trying to survive. If all of us were faced with the kind of horrors that many of these people have been faced with, we would do exactly the same as they did. Another meeting in Chelmsford after this, so I hope you'll forgive us if we just do one more question and then go. Will we be excused at that point?
Yes.
Should we put that to the vote or not? Would that be a bit risky?
I'll ask two questions, I think can be yes or no answers actually. John Hewitt has asked, will you get proportional representation back on the agenda?
Yes, I would. I'm suggesting that we, even in opposition, that Labour organise a constitutional convention in which we look at devolution within England, we look at the powers of Scotland and Wales, their parliament and their assembly, we look at voting systems, we look at voting age, we look at the, I don't want to start you on this, Jane, but we look at the House of Lords, and the need for something else like an elected upper chamber. I know it sounds a bit radical, but there is space left in the House of Lords. There are now nearly 900 of them, so how on earth they all get in there? and also look at various issues about the functioning of Parliament, and this might sound very obscure, but it's actually quite important, that the Prime Minister's ability to bypass Parliament by the use of the royal prerogative should be brought under Parliamentary scrutiny. Regional devolution. George Osborne is very keen on pushing the Northern Powerhouse, as he calls it. I don't have a problem with devolving services to regions. I have no problem with that whatsoever. But if local authorities are to accept in a large amount of central government services, they need to be very careful to make sure what they're accepting is properly funded. And I'm very worried about the consequence of this government trying to devolve NHS administration to local government without providing the resources to do it. So we end up losing the principle of a national health service free at the point of use for everybody, irrespective of income or residence.
Patricia Betty in the room. I'm going to ask this question because Patricia wrote me such a lovely long email and she must have thought I was horribly rude and said, you need to make that into one question. Will you put stopping cruelty and the slaughter of UK wildlife firmly on the political agenda?
Thank you for your question. Absolutely yes. The first organisation I ever joined was the League Against Cruel Sports when I was about 15. And that was why, because I grew up in rural Shropshire. I was born in Wiltshire, grew up in rural Shropshire. And my school was full of kids who, if they were rich enough, went hunting or shooting. If they were poorer than the rich kids who went hunting or shooting, they went around beating the bushes to get the birds out to be shot, or they went around working with the fox hunt in various ways. And so my role in school was to promote a debate calling for the abolition of fox hunting. I managed to get a seconder, but it didn't get much beyond that. But one of those kind of happy days of my life was when we got through the protection of badgers in our society. It's under threat again, I know. We got that through as a protected species, and we also got through the hunting bill into the Hunting Act. But there are also issues about how we treat wildlife and how we treat biodiversity within our society, because there are serious problems about monoagriculture and the damage that does to biodiversity, and there are serious problems for all of us if we don't do more about protecting all species of wildlife and all diversity of plant life. And so the loss of bee population should be seen as a warning to us of the damage we're doing on a much wider scale. And so I absolutely agree with you on the question of cruelty to wild animals and wildlife as a whole, but I also include with that the question of how we live with the natural world and how we live with our environment. It's partly a state of mind about how we do things, as well as conservation issues, because we destroy nature at our peril, because at the end of the day we destroy something that is very precious and unique, and it comes back to hit us and bite us in a different place at a different time. Thank you very much for your question.
But we have run out of time. I thought we had slightly longer. I apologise for those of you that have not had your questions asked, and I'm sorry that we haven't been able to go to the floor. Does anybody from the panel want to say anything before we tie up?
Could I just say thank you very much for coming along this afternoon. I'm really sorry about having to leave, but we've got obviously to be in Chelsea for this event shortly. Please, whatever the result on September the 12th, if you're a supporter of the party, please become a member. If you're a member, stay involved, stay active, because we've got huge things to do in campaigning on the welfare bill, on the trade union bill, on the budget and so many other things. That campaign and those campaigns, and in defending local government and public services, those campaigns lay the basis for future victories that we can win as a party. This government got in the 24% of the electorate voting for them. 50% of young people didn't vote. Nearly 36% of the overall electorate didn't vote in the election. I think it's because we weren't clear enough, weren't offering something clear enough as an alternative. I think if we stick to our principles and offer a campaign with those principles on how we can really dramatically affect and improve people's lives, then an awful lot of good things result and flow from that. Thank you very much for inviting me.